So we're going to talk about diabetic shoes, and I'm going to be honest with you. In the beginning, I thought, I get so many questions about diabetic shoes, and I keep thinking, oh, everybody wants to talk about this, but I hate them, and I know a lot of us hate them, but they're just a fact of life. What are you going to do? But I just get so many questions, and it's so confusing. And they have changed the regulations a little bit in very subtle ways over the past couple of years. So people are having just more and more problems, it seems like. So I just wanted to cover, what really are the requirements right now today, because they have changed a little over time. So and so let's talk about what the requirements are, and what's needed, and what are the changes. Like, what were you able to write before as an orthotist or prosthetist, and what do you have to write now? That's really what we're going to focus on as a documentation for the practitioner and for the doctors. And we'll throw in a little regulation there too. So and real quick, I want to give you an intro to me in case you haven't been on these webinars before. My name is Molly McCoy. You can see there. And I own and operate McCoy Consulting, which is just me, basically. And what I do is I help fellow practitioners with documentation issues, billing issues, that kind of thing, hopefully helping us all to learn better ways to document what we're doing so that we get paid for what we do. That's the goal. And my relationship to SPS is that they hire me to help their customers. So basically, they are offering my services to their customers so that people can have a better time with reimbursement, hopefully get paid for what they do. So that's important. Also, I have been in P&O for over 20 years. I went to University of Washington. I'm certified in both and licensed in Washington, and I had been licensed in Georgia previously. So you can look me up and see if there's any strikes against me on my record, I guess, or what have you. Anyway, so that's me. And there'll be a way to get a hold of me after this if you have further questions. Here's the overview of what we're going to cover. We're really going to dive into what happens with O&P notes, what we need in our O&P notes. And what we're going to do is talk about in some depth what the LCD and the policy article have in them that can help us as orthotists and prosthetists. I shouldn't leave prosthetists out. We do shoes too. But as orthotists, I'll focus on that we really, there are some key words that we can use that can help us moving forward. Of course, we're going to talk about doctor's notes, what's required, and how you can help them understand the requirements so that you get the notes you need. Obviously, that is the toughest part of all of this, trying to get doctors to give you what is needed in a timely manner. Everyone knows that's just a real pain in the neck. It can be a very big challenge. So hopefully we'll have some tricks to help you with that. Okay. So in the handouts that you got, there's this sheet that you see here. And this is basically just the cheat sheet that I've created for myself. So when I get a packet of documentation from practice and they want me to review it and check it, what I do is I sort of use my little cheat sheet here to see if all the stuff that should be in there is in there. This cheat sheet was made from a lot of different things. One of them is from the LCD. It's partly from the policy article, partly from the Dear Physician letter, and also from the program integrity manual. So I use all of those to pull out the guidelines that I need and put them here in a little quick cheat sheet. So I just thought you might want to have it. It can be a little helpful as you're going through and documenting what you need, but it really just gives you sort of a quick outline. But that's what that is, so that you know where I'm coming from and what I'm using to help review. So let's talk about the language in the LCD. Okay, so the reason I put all this language, you see in like all these slides, right? There's a bunch of, the next few slides has just straight up words from the LCD. The reason I put these in here is not because we want to just take all these words and stick them in our templates and then throw a checkbox on it and call it good. We don't want to do that. You don't want to use it in that way because templates and checkboxes are traditionally not a great way to have your notes to turn in, right? They're looking for narrative descriptive notes. So certainly, again, as I've said before, you can use templates. They're great to keep you on task, make sure you get what you need, but then you need to turn those that checklist or that template into a narrative note, right? So what I put this language up here for is just to say, look at how you're describing what you're doing in your notes. And if you're not describing it using the same sort of terminology that Medicare is, then change your terminology. And the reason I say that is because often so let's say that you don't bring up the fact that the shoe is leather, right? That's not part of your notes because every shoe that you do is leather, or maybe once in a while it's that stretchy fabric, but overall it's probably usually leather. But if we can bring up the fact that it's leather, or if we can bring up what type of shoe closure there is, then that can be really helpful as far as helping Medicare understand what we're doing. Again, you don't want to just throw that into your template and check a box. But as you're writing your narrative note, could you say the shoe closure is this type? Where normally you might say, oh, it's a lace up, or oh, it's a Velcro, whatever. Use the words shoe closure, right? So what that does for you is it helps you so that the Medicare computer can see what you're doing and can recognize those key terms. So they're going to fish it through or put it through the computer. And if the computer can pick up certain keywords, it's only going to help you as far as getting through audits and that kind of thing. And then, like, often we don't mention that the shoe has an internally seamless toe. But again, that's some language from Medicare that maybe if you throw in there, you help yourself out. So this is another slide that just has some of those vocabulary words, and this is all from the LCD. And again, you consider as you're describing what you've got and you're describing what you've done for the patient, consider using these terms. I wouldn't, as an orthotist, typically use the term removable inlay. That's not something that I typically would chart. But again, if I can change my terminology and use the Medicare language, I'm only going to help myself. So this last slide, I wanted to highlight that often the Medicare guidelines will talk about the 35 Shore A or higher material, et cetera. Well, probably you're always using that material because you've checked it to make sure it's compliant with the rules and regs, but maybe you don't mention it in your notes. So again, using these little keywords and sort of putting it in there is helpful, and using it as part of the descriptor. So maybe you would say the base layer is 3/16 inch 35 Shore A material in this custom insert. And then we've chosen a softer top and middle layer to improve protection from impact of walking. You know what I mean? So you can sort of, again, modify what you're saying to match the Medicare language. And it's only going to help you out in the end. So consider that. One other thing that the LCD language says that I find interesting is that you'll notice the detail. I've just put up, 4 slides here with excruciating detail about materials and top layers and thicknesses and, and densities and blah, 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 on and on. That is a really good indication that they're looking for detail from you. Right? So they're saying here, we're giving you all this extreme detail on what we want these shoes and inserts to have. And that's a good indication for you to say, wow, I should give some good extra detail in my notes, right? They're basically giving you the words to use to detail it in your notes. And we want to sort of make note of that, right? So notice that they're talking about details of where the thickness of the material is. So often you might say you have a tri-lam material, or you have material that has the 3 different densities. That's great. But notice what Medicare has got in their LCD language. The central portion of the base layer of the heel can be thinner. They're basically saying, you ground down the center part and then you leave the rest of it full thickness to allow pressure reduction. Those are key things that you could be putting in your notes or something similar to say, yeah, I recognize that you want to know where I'm grinding this thing, where it's thin and where it's thick, so that they can understand that you did customize it. And that you did make some significant modifications. You're not just pulling something off the shelf and shoving it in the shoe. You're making real modifications and giving them the detail about it. So notice it's just detail, 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 which is, I understand that's a killer because, one of the things about diabetic shoes is it's a very low margin kind of item. So ideally you'd be fitting diabetic shoes, but you wouldn't spend a lot of time on the documentation part of it because that eats into your profit, if you have profit at all from a diabetic shoe anyway. But again, if you can get into the habit of using these terms and sort of describing what you're doing in a narrative way, or use dictation, something like that, then it can really be helpful and help get your claims paid more often. So it's definitely touchy, where I know you have to keep it a little bit, less time consuming, but still make a profit. And someone says, can you write inserts were made from custom molded impression? Absolutely. One of those slides has language about it that says you took an impression of the patient's foot. Absolutely. If you can explain what kind of impression you took, and then explain that you made the insert over the mold of the patient's foot, that's ideal. And then again, just explain, where did you grind it? Why did you grind it there? Those kind of things. But yeah, that's a great point. So, okay. So what do you need to chart, right? What needs to be in your notes? Different things for different appointments. So if we're talking about just the evaluation appointment, right, just to start, Medicare is very specific about what needs to be in all the notes for the different stages of getting this to the patient. So here's what may have changed, or what people may not be so aware of from previous LCDs or previous guidelines. They've gotten a lot more detailed, where they want to know, and notice that we're talking right now about the 5,500 shoes. So A5500, they want to know about the examination of the patient's feet. So you need to describe the foot exam of this specific person, not just a checkbox that says, yes, I examined their feet, check. Describe, looked at Mr. Smith's feet, saw this, this, and this, right? You need to describe what the abnormalities are that need accommodating. So again, saying something like, or checking a box that says, are there foot deformities? Yes, and checking the box is not good enough. You need to say, there are foot deformities, this is what they are, and this is how we're going to address it with a shoe, or this is how a shoe is going to help. So it's starting to look a lot more like custom AFO or custom prosthetic notes, right? And you need to also, this is the killer, right? This is the one I never see from people's notes recently, and that I've seen quite a few in the past few months that are getting denied for this reason, but a description of the measuring process, right? Which is really weird. A lot of times you might just check them, or you might just say measured the patient, but you need to actually describe how you measured the patient. It seems a little strange, but that's the level of detail that they're asking for. And someone asked the question, can you use pictures? You can use pictures if you describe them and if you have a way to get them to Medicare. I can tell you, I have not once in a year and a half of going through people's chart notes and looking through notes from all over the country, I have not one single time gotten a picture that I could actually see. And I get pictures pretty often that people have in the charts, but by the time it goes through either a fax or a scan in an email, or even when it's just direct, it just never comes through visible. So I would say pictures are really tricky, and they probably don't do as much as we'd hoped, right? So we hope to show, hey, look, clearly there's a deformity, but really, unless you write it out in the narrative, the picture is not going to help you too much, probably. It doesn't mean you couldn't use a picture. It's just not maybe as good as writing out a description of it. And then someone says, can you state the patient was measured standing with a Brannick measurement device? Thank you. Stole my punchline, but that's totally fine. That's exactly what you need to put. You need to say how you measured them, right? Not just that you did. Again, it sounds weird, and it might get kind of repetitive that you say, yes, I use a Brannick device. I've had them standing, blah, blah, blah. But that's what you need to do. If you use an ML gauge, you need to note that. If you use a tape, note that. If you're using a Brannick, note that. But yes, absolutely talk about what device you used and how you did the measurement, whether it was standing or seated or what have you. And then if we look at the evaluation notes for, say, custom shoes or custom inserts, then you have to have all of the above, right? So a description of the examination of the foot, description of the measuring, and a description of the abnormalities that you're addressing. And then on top of that, you need a description of taking the impressions or making the casts or scanning. So again, kind of from that last slide, you're not just saying, I then took an impression. I measured the patient, I took an impression. You're going to say something more like, I measured the patient standing with a Brannick device, and then I took impressions using biofoam, or I took a cast, or I scanned the person's foot, whatever you did, and describe that process. And I know it's crazy. I know this sounds crazy, and everybody's saying, oh, you're nuts. We can't write all this. There is a way. I'm going to show you here going forward. There's a way to do it fairly quickly, but it does involve kind of changing our standard systems. of just, like I said, checking off the boxes. And they do want this level of detail, believe it or not. It's kind of crazy, but that's what they're asking for, a Medicare. And then, so going on to the delivery appointment notes for, say, off-the-shelf shoes with or custom shoes and custom inserts, you have to describe the in-person evaluation of the fit. The patient has to be wearing the shoes and inserts. It may seem to you when you read your notes that it's obvious that you put the shoe on the patient because you say something like fit is appropriate, patient is satisfied with the fit. To me, and to probably everyone else on the planet except Medicare, that would indicate that the patient had the shoes on. It's not good enough. You have to actually say, patient came in, we put the shoes on their feet, patient donned the shoes and wore the shoes, and described that they stood in them, they walked in them, and they sat down in them, and they took them on and off themselves. All of that process, you need to describe all of that so that it's clear that the patient wore the shoes in your presence and you assess the fit. And that's the other thing. Describe how they fit and how you assess the fit. I see very often notes that come through that just say fit shoes, patient satisfied with fit, follow up 2 weeks, whatever, right? And I guess, and I'm always saying back to people, how do you know the patient is satisfied with the fit? Because obviously they probably can't feel very well, so they don't know. You need to assess the fit and describe that assessment. So you're going to say, had the patient stand via palpation, I checked to make sure everything was where it was supposed to be. I looked at the insert on the patient and made sure that the wells that were carved out are in the right places. Something like that, describing how you checked to make sure everything fit the way it was supposed to. That's the kind of detail you need to put in there. It can no longer be just patient wore the shoe, or patient on and it fit well, or fit is appropriate. You have to describe it. And that, it seems to me that's kind of new. I went hunting for this because I saw so many people getting dinged for this or getting denials because they didn't describe that. And I found in the policy article this line: the supplier must document an objective assessment of the fit of the shoes and insert. And then this line, which I swear I had never seen before. Maybe everybody else out there has seen this, but to me, this was kind of a revelation. I'm like, where did that line come from? I don't remember that being in there before, but it actually says in the LCD, in the policy article now, a patient's subjective statements regarding the fit of the shoe as the sole documentation of the in-person delivery does not meet the criteria. So I went looking to see when that was added. And it looks like, from what I was able to look up, that was added in 2011. Although I swear I have looked in detail at that policy article many, many times since 2011, and I never noticed that line. So maybe I'm just blind. I don't know. According to CMS, it's been in there forever, and we should have seen it before. Like I said, I don't really know. It seems weird to me, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. Point is, it's in there now. So if you're only noting that the patient said that the fit was good, or the patient was satisfied with the fit, and then moving on, it's not going to be enough, and you can get denied based on that. So check your notes. What are they like now? Are they patient specific, or are they just check boxes? Do you have detail about when you're measuring and taking molds and assessing? And check boxes just won't do it anymore. There has to be a narrative. Okay, so that's the take-home message there, is just to check and see what you're doing and make sure it fits these criteria. These maybe not new criteria, but again, I swear I've never seen that, but whatever. If anybody had seen that, or if you knew about that particular line in policy, this one with the patient subjective statement thing, if you've known about that since 2009, I'd love to hear from you, because like I said, I haven't met anybody who had seen that line before, but maybe I missed it. So let's move on to this example. This isn't in your handouts. If you want it, I'm happy to give it to you, but it was just I just whipped it up. Basically, I've gotten over the past probably 4 or 5 months, a lot of cases or documentation reviews for therapeutic shoes, for diabetic shoes, and they all have the same mistakes in them. So I just made one up based on all those cases that I've reviewed. So that's what this is. I sort of instead of pulling one of them, I just made one up as an example, just to show you what I'm seeing so frequently that's been a problem as far as getting paid for these. So let's say that you have a statement from your certifying physician. That would be this here, right? about your patient, Mr. Joe Average. And the certifying physician, which is me, Dr. Me, right, says the patient has peripheral neuropathy with evidence of callus formation and poor circulation. That's the one they circle, okay? And then they sign off, everything's cool, right? Then we go on, so those are the two that they've picked, right? Then we go on to see the patient and make notes. And I swear, this is not an example of one that I've seen. This is, I've gotten quite a few that look exactly like this, the notes, where they'll say the patient, the evaluation shows numbness in feet. It does because the doctor says the patient has these two things. So it might be good to make sure that your note shows the same thing that the doctor is saying, right? And then the treatment plan will often say something like took impressions and measured. So here's my issue with this. Abbreviations never work for Medicare. It's always a bad idea to use them. It just adds confusion where you don't need any. So if you measured, then write out measured, just, what have you. And then always I see a lot of handwritten notes, especially with diabetic shoes. Again, I assume that's because we're all trying to rush with diabetic shoes because there's such a tiny profit margin that if it took you 6 hours to write the notes for it, you are not only not making money, but you're probably losing money. So I get that, but there's got to be maybe a faster way with dictation or something. But handwriting is really important. It's got to be legible. And if they see any mistakes or any areas like this where they can't really see it or there's abbreviations, they will just not read the whole thing. So the whole thing is out and then you're really sunk, right? So then again, we want to match what the doctor was saying. So if these are your only issues, that there's numbness and that we're going to protect the feet, that's probably not detailed enough, right? So let's say that we improve this. Let's say we go back and we add a lot of detail here, which I've done here. First thing, I don't know about you, but when I see this screen, my eyes cross. I'm like, well, I can't read any of that. Firstly, it's handwritten. And although if you look at it, it's somewhat legible. My handwriting's not spectacular, but whose is when they're in a hurry, right? It's not terrible. If I wanted to find some information, I could probably find it in this note. But if you think about the reviewer who's got a stack of however many, 100 different cases on their desk, and they see this, they're going to shut down just as fast as you just shut down when you saw it. So I would be surprised if anybody is actually reading this, right? Right now even, or if the reviewer is either. But note that it didn't take very long. This is really all the detail I need in my notes, and I'm still at 1 page for 2 visits. Here's the first visit, here's the second visit, still at 1 page. So it wasn't a lot, but again, it's hard to read with a handwritten note, and also it did take me a long time, compared to typing it, to handwrite all this, so not ideal. Then let's take that same note and show it this way, right? Here's the exact same wording, the exact same note as this one, but in this case, it's typed. And again, I'm at 1 page for 2 visits. So I'm not talking, when I say add more detail to your notes, I'm not talking about writing 35 pages of notes. You don't have to add a ton of time to the note writing process. You just need to write things that are going to help you out and details that are going to help you get this paid, as opposed to checking the boxes and writing details that don't correlate to the LCD or the policy article, right? So again, if we look at this, I've just added some basic details. I'm not going to read this to you. You can read it on your own time, but the bottom line is we've described using the Brannick device. Okay, sorry, I'm going to start up here. We've described the evaluation that what we saw, right? Again, matching what the doctor wrote. So the doctor said this patient has callousing. So guess what? My evaluation found callousing. That's good, as opposed to my evaluation finding numbness, and that's it, right? And then my treatment plan, all I'm going to say is just a little more detail on what I did. I measured him. I used a Brannick device. That's key, right? I put the measurement there. It came out to this detail, this type of measurement. And because of the shape of the foot, I'm just going to note, guess what? This person has a funny shaped foot, so I recommend this particular shoe. As a side note, I made up this shoe. I don't know what PW Minor has, and I don't know if they have a 780. So don't think that's a real shoe. But point is, I'm going to put the type of shoe and why we chose that shoe. And then I'm just going to describe that I use biofoam to take the impressions. Easy, right? And then um, a little detail on how the treatment is going to address the problem. So again, it's not a ton of detail here, but I'm just mentioning that, he's got poor circulation, so his skin's at risk. So I picked a shoe that's shaped more like him so that we don't have an issue. And then due to the callousing, the inserts will have a well. It's what you're doing anyway. You're probably building the insert that way, but now you're just going to make a quick note of it, that you did put a well, that you were, giving some detail. And then someone asked the question, what about documenting for shoe modifications? Example, rocker soles. Absolutely document that. Any modification you're making, document it here and show that you're doing it. Because again, we want them to notice that we're not just pulling a shoe off the shelf, we're actually doing something here. There is some element of customization, and you want to show that. And nobody can do that but you. Right? You can't just go to Fred Meyer or to whatever store and say, I'd like a rocker on that shoe. It's not going to happen. So we want to point out that that person seeing an orthotist is important because we had to make special modifications that only we can do. And someone says, are we allowed to bill 3 pairs of A5513 along with 5500? The reimbursement versus the work involved is crazy. Absolutely right. The work involved to make inserts and to do shoes often ends up being a no profit venture for people. Even if you have the greatest system in the world and you're super efficient, it's really tight to get profit out of this. But yes, you can bill it that way. But again, like you said, it is the work compared to what you get reimbursed makes it a really tight or no margin kind of thing, which is not so great. Unfortunately, I don't have a great answer for that. Guess what? You could do blankety blank and end up making a great profit on this. Probably not. I don't have any tricks like that, I'm afraid. But it's a good point. So. And then in the delivery appointment, again, this is a second appointment. So we got 2 appointments on one sheet. Not so bad. Not a ton of notes here. This isn't going to take me 12 hours. Okay. It's going to take me just a tiny bit more in the beginning, and then it'll get faster as I do it. But at the delivery appointment, you really want to make sure you're clear that you check the placement of the well on the inserts to make sure it's in the proper location. You had the patient put the shoe on, and that you had them stand and then checked visually and by palpation that the feet were in the correct place in the shoe, etc. Just a little bit of detail to show that you really did work with this patient when they came in. You didn't throw the shoes at them and kick them out the door, right? So, and then just go back to say, look at the difference between this note, which again has more detail but didn't take me 6 hours, and this note, which has no detail, is not going to help me get paid for this, and took me, a little less time, but not enough to make up for the fact that I'm not going to get paid on it, right? If I have those notes. So let's see real quick. There's a question. Doesn't the delivery have to have a date as well? Yes, thank you. That's a great point. I think on my sheet here, let me look. Yeah, so I didn't, up here I have the name and the date and blah, 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 and I don't here. And then I think here, yeah, I didn't put name and date. It absolutely should have this information down here for the delivery appointment. Most definitely. So yeah, I messed that up on there, but for sure yours should have the date and the patient's name, even if it's on the same page, and especially the date if it's on the same page. But yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So what are the requirements for your doctor's notes? Let's talk about that. Now, this is a little tricky too. Oh, hold on. Don't we need a picture of a foot and need to note where the callousing is, etc.? Again, I would say, oh, you mean like an outline or a drawing of the foot on the measurement form? You could, or if you mean a photograph, I would say photographs don't really come through. Oh yeah, he says yes, that's what he meant. So yeah, a picture of the foot is not by policy required, but absolutely it's helpful, and it will make it easier, because you can put a narrative about, well, the callus was at the base of the fifth or whatever, but if you have an outline drawing of a foot and you can mark that on there, that's going to be really helpful. I would say, though, you can't rely on that by itself. So if you have a note that says, assess the patient foot, see picture for detail, and then you've got circled and it says callus here, sore here, whatever, that's not going to be enough. You'd have to have the picture and then also explain it in the notes. Again, remembering that they're putting these through a computer algorithm, and the computer is looking for language and for words. So so the drawing will help the reviewer if you end up in the reviewer's stack of things to do, and the verbiage will help the computer that hopefully allows you to avoid the reviewer altogether if you're lucky, right? So you really got to have both, and it will help the reviewer to have a picture, most definitely, an outline drawing. So thank you. That's a great question. So requirements for doctor's notes, what are those? So this is where it's going to get a little tricky, right? Because there are some weird requirements. So I'm going to go a little slower here if I can. Let me check my time here. Yeah, we're doing fine on time. So as far as the prescription or the order, that can be from a podiatrist, physician assistant, a doctor, whatever. That can be from anybody. The certifying statement, if you didn't already know this, can only be from a doctor, right? From a medical doctor or a doctor of osteopathy. So that's one tricky thing that happens that people get hung up on sometimes. But then here's the other trick. Now, it used to be that if you just had all your forms, that often you didn't have to have the doctor's notes, but that's not the case anymore. So now you need to have your certifying statement, your order, your DWO, your blah, 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 your this and that, all those forms you still have to have, but then you also have to have medical records for medical necessity. And those can only be from a doctor of medicine or a doctor of osteopathy, right? It can only be from a medical doctor or doctor of osteopathy. There's one exception. I'm going to explain the exception coming up here. But in general, that's the tricky place that hangs people up very often. Someone asked here, can you have the diabetic doctor sign off on the DPM notes? That's where I'm going next. So yes, let me say that in this next slide. And then someone else asked, can the MD or the DO sign off on DPM? Yeah, so let me show you that. You can have the doctor sign off on the notes, but there is a very specific way that has to happen. And if it's not done exactly that way, then you're not going to get, then those notes won't mean anything. Then the notes don't work. So that's where it's tricky. So let's look at that in this next slide. Here's the requirement for doctor sign off, okay? If the medical record for medical necessity, oops, I had a thing up there. If the medical record for medical necessity can come from a podiatrist or a physician assistant or nurse practitioner, etc., but only if the note is written prior to or on the same day as the certifying statement. Do you see how that can trip you up, right? So you get a certifying statement from the MD or DO, but then if you want them to use the podiatrist notes, they have to have signed off on those notes before they write and date the certifying statement. That's pretty tricky. Okay, and that's something that often trips people up too. Someone's asking, do we have to have the medical records in our files in order to provide the shoes? Technically, by the regulation, you don't have to have it in your charts before you actually provide the shoe or even before you send in the claim. But you'd be crazy not to have it in there because you're going to get asked to look at it most likely, at least half the time. And if you don't already have it, it's going to be a huge hassle. Or God forbid, you don't have it, you send in the claim, they ask for it, you get it, and it doesn't have what you need. Right? And then she says, or is it just that we are responsible to provide the notes if requested? That's true. But again, what if you can't get the notes when they request it? Or what if the notes come back and they're not acceptable? So it's best practice to get the notes ahead of time, make sure they have what they need to have, and then do your billing. Although you can ask Medicare all day and all night, and they're going to say, oh, no, it's not a requirement to have the notes. Well, yeah, it's not a requirement, but it really sinks your ship if you don't have them ahead of time. So, and then someone asks, if a nurse practitioner works at a doctor's office, how do we do that? We've been denied because the doctor didn't see the patient. That's exactly right. So whether the nurse practitioner is in the same office as the certifying doctor or not, they still have to follow these guidelines. So if you have a certifying statement that's dated incorrectly, that isn't dated prior to or on the same day as those medical record notes, then it doesn't matter if they're in the same office or not, you can get denied on that. Also, the note that so let's say you're going to use the podiatrist note or the nurse practitioner or whatever, it is written prior to or the same day as the certifying statement, then it still has to be reviewed by the doctor, the one that does the certifying statement, signed by them, and a statement of agreement has to be written by the certifying physician. So you have to have in the certifying physician's own notes, not whether a template will work on that or not is unclear, but in general, the doctor, oh, someone says, does the doctor need to concur? They absolutely do. In general, if you're going to use someone else's notes, someone other than the certifying doctor, then you have to meet these other requirements. So again, is this a new requirement that they're asking for? Apparently it's not. Although I would say, based on the research I did, they said, oh no, this has been around since '09. Well, okay, maybe they weren't enforcing it, and I just missed it in there. I swear I had never seen this level of detail, and they are enforcing it now. So whether it's new or not, who knows? But it's absolutely what needs to be happening for you. Everything must be dated. Someone asked, does it need to be dated? Everything has to be dated, and then you need to verify, do the dates line up? Right? Again, does the medical record for medical necessity have a date before the certifying statement? That's important. And someone asked, they still have to see the certifying doctor before that as well, correct? Yes, they have to have an in-person with that certifying doctor. So there's that. Yeah. So it's a lot. It's a lot of steps we have to go through and make sure they're correct. Do you recommend that we simply require that the patient see an MD or DO to begin with? It's up to you guys, whatever works for you. But I would say if you're going to use someone else's notes, like the podiatrist notes, this regulation that says that the timing has to be right and that it has to be reviewed, signed off, and a statement of agreement, blah, 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 that ends up getting pretty heavy as far as what they need to do. So if you have the option of the person seeing the MD or DO, to begin with and getting all the documentation from one doctor, yeah, absolutely do that. I know that for a lot of people, though, that's not something that can happen because often the certifying doctor will say, look, I'm not a podiatrist. I don't do full foot eval, so too bad. So if you've got that kind of doctor that's not going to work with you on that, then maybe you don't have a choice and you have to follow these guidelines. So someone asked, so the note from the DPM must be written prior to the date of the certifying physician, or it must be co-signed prior to or on the date of the certifying statement. Yeah, it's tricky, really tricky, but that's the case. Someone else is asking, is there a requirement with regard to what time frame prior to the certifying physician statement the doctor's note would have to be? That would just be the standard rule where it has to be within the last 6 months. But again, the timing on which came first is going to be important. Another question here, if the nurse practitioner works at the doctor's office, the doctor still has to see the patient. Not necessarily, as long as the order of operations is correct. So as long as, say, the nurse practitioner is writing the medical necessity notes, that has to happen prior to the doctor doing the certifying statement, and then the doctor would need to review, sign off, and write the statement of agreement. So the doctor wouldn't necessarily have to see the patient for that part of it, but the doctor still needs to have record that they saw the patient to manage their diabetes. So there's still sort of a face-to-face requirement there. And then someone says here, I send office notes from my podiatrist with a line for the MD or DO to sign off that states I have reviewed and co-signed this note when this is done. Is this acceptable? I'm going to tell you, I don't know if that's acceptable because I have seen several in the past few months be denied using that same system. However, the reason for denial was unclear. So I'm not sure if it was denied because the people were using that system where they sent the DPM notes to the MD and signed off, or maybe the dates were wrong. It wasn't really clear. So I don't know the answer to that one. It doesn't. I can't tell if that's been a problem for people or not so far. So hard to say. But those are great questions. Thank you, everybody, for asking questions, and definitely keep them coming. Let me move to this next slide, and then I'll get a couple more of these questions. As far as further requirements for the doctor's note, this is getting even more obnoxious, so hold on to your hats. Hopefully everyone's sitting down. The certifying doctor must note in the medical record, or again, if it's one of those other people making the notes, it has to have all this detail and the doctor signs off and write dates, blah, blah, blah. Must note in the medical record one or more of the qualifying conditions A through F. Now, the qualifying conditions A through F, those are the ones you've seen before, like the previous amputation, history of ulcer, history of pre-ulcerative callus, blah, blah, blah. Those that are listed in the LCD. But here's the interesting part, or the weird part, is that the note documenting the qualifying conditions must be more detailed than general descriptions that are listed in A through F. So if the doctor writes in their chart note that the patient has a history of pre-ulcerative callus and then checks that box on the certifying statement, that wouldn't be enough, right? And so that maybe is a shocker. So who knows, right? That's kind of a that in the past, I would say, and they back up, in the past, I would say that was probably enough. Now, apparently, it is not enough. So the doctor needs to write in, or whoever's writing the medical necessity note needs to write in that note what the specific deformity was and where it was. They need to write the location of the current or historical ulcer or callus. So just to say they had an ulcer, they had a callus back in the day isn't good enough. They need to say, on the 5th Met Head back in 2010, the person had a callus. It's a little out there. It's a lot. What type of amputation? Not just the patient has an amputation. The symptoms, the signs, or the tests supporting the diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy, plus the presence of a callus. That means that they need to write in there what this person is experiencing for peripheral neuropathy. They can't just say that they have it. They have to say the peripheral neuropathy presents with burning in the plantar surface of the foot, blah, blah, blah. And we've done Doppler to figure out that the person has poor circulation or whatever. It needs to explain what tests were used or what signs or symptoms were used to make that diagnosis of peripheral neuropathy, which is kind of big. So someone says here the medical record needs to show a foot exam and the results, the callus on the heel, etc. Exactly. Yeah, it does. And then someone asked, could they mention the podiatrist description of the treatment deformity? So could the doctor say, there is a deformity of the foot, see podiatrist note? Again, if the timing is correct, and they're using the podiatrist note as the note for medical necessity, and they sign off on it properly, et cetera, then yes, they could reference that. But it's tricky. They have to do it the right way. So just be careful of that. And then they have to write specifics about poor circulation in the feet. This is the one that put a dagger in my heart. This is the one where I was like, I can't believe they're asking for this. It's really painful. So again, I apologize. I'm even putting this on the screen. But not just the specifics about poor circulation in the foot or in the feet, but saying, if the doctor says a diagnosis that the patient has a diagnosis of high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, or coronary artery disease, or edema, if they write any of that by itself, that would not be sufficient. So that is like brand new news to me. Okay. I don't know if you guys have seen this before, you understood this to be the case, but to me, that seems like a new regulation. Again, I'm blown away by the changes in this LCD and this policy article that I swear I have read multiple times, and I never saw this stuff until I started getting a lot more calls about problems with billing in diabetic shoes. So normally I would have said, if the doctor writes that the person had congestive heart failure and has edema, you're good to go. But apparently that is not the case. So be aware that in going forward, or, currently, the doctor would need to say the person had congestive heart failure, the person has edema. Where is the edema? It's actually in the foot and ankle, leading me to understand that there's poor circulation in the feet, blah, blah, blah. They need some of that detail in there about it. So just having that diagnosis of issues that could lead to poor circulation of the feet is not good enough. That, again, hopefully we're all sitting down. To me, that was kind of a revelation, but there it is. So here is a cheat sheet. This is also in your handouts. This is a cheat sheet that I made up using, I shouldn't call it that, I should call it a guideline, pardon me. But basically, the information that CMS puts out to help educate the doctors on what's required in their notes, to me, is way too long, way too confusing, scattered all over different handouts. You'd have to give the doctor like 4 different handouts to cover all the information. So what I did was I took the the Dear Physician letter, the program integrity manual, the LCD, the policy article, all of those things, and took all the duplicates out basically, and then came up with this one sheet that has most of everything. Now, I would say this is just something I've been using that seems to be having good results, but certainly check it, make sure you agree with it. You're welcome to take it, use it, modify it however you want. I'm happy to send you a Word file of this if you want to take it and change it up however works for you. But basically, I was just looking to make something that is one page, super clear, so that doctors can understand what's required of them for the notes, and then how they could meet those requirements. Here's another question. Do we have to have a detailed prescription with codes, description, and justifications? Are checkbox prescriptions accepted? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, because there's going to be a difference between the regulation on the detailed written order versus the standard versus the initial prescription. So if you could email me that question, I will look it up and make sure I give you an answer that is consistent with policy. And then as a Medicare provider, can we decline seeing the diabetic patient for shoes? That is also a really tricky question. You'd think that would be pretty straightforward. My understanding of the rule of the law was that no, you can't pick and choose, right? You can't say we're not going to see any diabetic patients with Medicare, but we are going to see Medicare patients for other things. My understanding of the law is that that was a no-no. You cannot do that. If you see Medicare patients, you see them all. But someone brought up a loophole to me the other day, which I have not fully investigated, and I don't know if it's correct or not. So I'm going to go with the conservative approach that no, you can't decline seeing them. You either see all your Medicare patients or you see nobody. But I would say somewhere out there, I heard there might be some exception that, again, I haven't really looked at thoroughly. So sorry, I don't have a better, more concrete answer. But and then someone else asked, do you have one of these cheat sheets for prosthetics? I do have some other cheat sheets. I'm happy to send them out to folks. So if you want any of those, just let me know. And I will probably end up putting them on the SPS website too, that you could download, but you can send me an email to get them. Other people make cheat sheets. Turns out that CMS makes a sweet cheat sheet for therapeutic shoes for diabetics, and this is the Noridian one too. The other one's the one from NHIC, I think is identical to the one from, CGS, you see here, was identical to the one from the main CMS site. NHIC, I didn't see one on there, or it wasn't very good. I can't remember which. But anyway, you can go to your MAC website and probably find a checklist for documentation. Again, these are long. I'm showing you the first page of 4. So both of these are like 4 or 5 pages long. So they're long and they have a bunch of stuff. Like, to me, this mashes up what the front office is doing, plus what the doctor is doing, plus what the orthotist is doing. So my cheat sheets tend to separate that out and have one for the doctor, one for front office, one for orthotist. But these kind of have everything put together. So I guess it just depends on how you like your cheat sheets done, right? And then someone asked, would you fill out the 855s for a Medicare number you choose what services when you fill out the 855s for a Medicare number, you choose what services your office offers, and you can decide not to choose the therapeutic shoe option. Thank you. So there's the answer to that previous question. Look into the, when you fill out your 855 form to get your Medicare number, you apparently, according to this person, can choose not to offer, not to do therapeutic shoes. So there's not really a loophole. That's not a loophole. That's just the rule. But there you go. So you could do that. But again, if you're doing that, if you're going to go back and change that form, then you're making, you can't waffle, right? You make the decision, you're going to do it, and you're not going to see anybody for that, for many Medicare patients for the shoes. So, but thank you for answering that question. That's a great point. Helpful. Okay. So the tricky spots in the shoes currently are really changing our notes, right? Making sure that we're describing our measuring process, describe your impression taking, and describe the fitting in detail. Again, it doesn't have to be excruciating detail that takes up 6 pages, but it does need to be some detail, more than maybe we're used to. And then remember who can sign what, right? So the RX or the order can be anybody. The certifying statement has to be the MD or DO. And then remember that we got to get those medical necessity records. That's a little newish. That's a little weird. Something that maybe is updated from last time we all looked at the LCD or policy article. And it must be detailed, and it needs to be written or properly signed off by the MD. And then always remember that, again, I would say like in diabetic shoes, that was probably the one place where templates seem to be working, and they're not anymore. So Medicare has said repeatedly templates aren't enough for doctors or for orthotists or prosthetists. Doesn't mean you can't use them. It just means it wouldn't be your sole type of notes. So just remember that they're cracking down in all areas where they really want people to give a narrative description and not use just templates. Here's another question. Are Medicare patients seen even without a surety bond? There are problems acquiring surety bonds. Oh, that one I'm not going to tackle here, but please email me that question and I will look into it for you. But for time's sake and because I need to look up specific regulation, I'll skip that one, sorry. But do email me that, I will look into it. And then someone said, so with that said, can an established facility renew their policy contracting with Medicare? So could you go back to that 855 form that someone mentioned earlier and opt out of shoes? I don't know that off the top of my head. I would say, you can always go back and and change how you're running things. That's the general rule, but I don't know specifically for that 855 form. So I would have to look that up for you. But again, if you want to email me the question, I'm happy to look it up. So, okay. So, wait, here's our helpful person again. Yes, you can resubmit that form at any time. So according to one of our other people here on the webinar, the 855 form can be changed anytime you want. So there you go. There's one answer. Is Medicare doing anything to further educate doctors at this point? Oh, they're very happy to tell you that they are working so hard to educate doctors by sending out long, drawn out letters in very small font to your doctors. So no, I mean, my understanding is they offer education programs, so they will put it out there that the doctors can come and take an online course, or they can look up on the website what they need to know. But do they push anything out to the doctors? Not that I'm aware of. Anything past if the doctor's on the email service or the what do you call it? The newsletter for Medicare. So right, my understanding is they're not really doing much. And then let's see, where do I go to listen to this webinar? Again, you will actually, everyone will get an email after this that, and this will take about 2 weeks, be aware, that says, guess what, the webinar is available online for you to listen to again, and you'll get a link to it. If you don't get that email for some reason, be sure to check the SPS website. It takes me about 2 weeks to get them up there usually, but in that time you could go there and it should be up and ready for you to view. And then it's also going to be on YouTube. So you can find it on YouTube in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. One other question, do doctor signatures still have to be the original or can they be faxed now? I would have to look that up specifically. I don't think that regulation has changed. Not that I saw anyway. And then someone said if you resubmit the 855 form, that will require recertification from CMS. Oh, that's an interesting point. So something to think about if you decide to do that, to change your 855 form, you might have to go through some other hurdles. So here's my contact information. There's a couple other questions. Getting denials since doctor's signature was not legible, had to get an attestation. That's the case for anything you bill to Medicare. You absolutely every signature has to be legible, and I've never seen one that is. So you almost always just need to get a signature log or an attestation right off the bat. Don't even wait, because it is a problem. So one other question here, does the patient have to be seen by the certifying physician and a DPM in order for Medicare to pay for diabetic shoes and inserts, or is it sufficient enough for all documentation to come from the MD? It absolutely would be sufficient to have everything come from the MD, but again, the level of detail that those notes need to have, often the MD won't do. If you have an MD who will do a thorough foot evaluation and exam on a patient and give you the info you need, then spectacular. Yeah, you could cut out one extra person and just get everything from the MD. But I would say you want to really look at that MD's notes and make sure they're detailed enough. And then one other issue here, we had issues with a doctor not being explicit enough. Oh, here's this exact thing in their notes. So now I send a form that states the doctor's name, patient is under a comprehensive plan, blah, 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 to qualify for the therapeutic shoe criteria, and a copy of the Medicare LCD included for review. This is signed and dated by the MD or DO. Does this satisfy the requirement? Any form that you create and send to the doctor will not qualify as medical record. So it may help and it may be good information, but you would then, even after this form, you would still have to have doctor's notes or chart notes that describe the patient, of an encounter. You have to have a note of an encounter, and it can't be on a form. It has to be, in the doctor's own words and all that. So yes, it might help. It might be something that's good, but you would still have to have medical record notes, and that would not qualify. So it's tricky. They're definitely, putting the screws to us to get a lot of detail. And then another question, we get chart notes. This is to cover the fact that they don't include information. Right. So if there's no information on the forms that you're sending them, then chart notes are the way to go. And actually, you probably should get the chart notes anyway. And yeah, that form they're saying is a supplement. They don't use it on their own. Yeah, absolutely as a supplement. Anything's helpful. Why not? But you'd still have to get the notes, and the notes still have to have detail. So. Cool. Okay, there's my contact information. As I said, please, if you have additional questions or comments, please let me know. I'm happy to help. And this whole thing is sponsored by and brought to you by SPS. SPS is the reason that you're getting free credits for this course. So just to make a note that SPS pays for the credits so that you can, like I said, get 1.5 credits for free, which is always nice. So we thank you for their sponsorship. And again, you'll get some information in the follow-up email about where you can access the recording and the quiz and all that good stuff. So thank you very much for attending. There's going to be a monthly webinar. So the next webinar is going to be about replacement sockets and prosthetics. So be on the lookout for the email inviting you to that one, and it will have also 1.5 credits, just like the rest of them have. So we look forward to that next webinar. And again, thank you for attending this one. Any questions or comments, please get a hold of me afterwards. Thanks.